I'm a pilot for a well-known cargo airline in the United States. I have had the strangest experience of my entire career as a pilot, and I don't know what to do about it. It was a day like any other. In Florida, I checked the flight schedule on my laptop and saw that I had to go from Miami to Puerto Rico and return. This seemed like excellent news, since I could return home the same day. My co-pilot was a guy named Jim. We hit it off from the start. During the pre-flight briefings, we boarded our modernized Boeing 737. The first leg of the flight was smooth with no turbulence. Although air traffic control diverted us over Cuba to avoid a storm that looked threatening over the ocean, we skipped the Bermuda Triangle, Jim said, looking at his digital map. "Do you really believe in those stories?" I asked him. He had flown that route several times and never noticed anything strange in the famous Bermuda Triangle. I always thought it was a legend created by people seeking attention. "Oh, but it's real," Jim said seriously. "Why do you think they diverted over Cuba?" I laughed. Little diversions happen all the time. "Jim, a storm is nothing paranormal. We didn't have more time to argue because we had to prepare to land. The landing went smoothly. The plane was refueled, and the ground crew started to refuel. One of the mechanics came over with a worried face. "Captain, it seems there is a small problem." "A small problem?" I asked. "Yes, Captain. It seems there is a fuel leak in one of the lines," I sighed. The company policy was to do an inspection and ground the plane if there was a suspicion of a fuel leak. Who knew how long it would take? I called the dispatcher, and after talking to the engineering team, they gave us the green light for the inspection. Jim and I took the opportunity to have lunch at the airport while I read some things on my phone in the crew room to pass the time in short. After about 6 hours, the mechanics informed us that the plane was ready to fly back. At least we didn't have any passengers to complain. It was already night, and it was starting to dark. Didn't matter much to me, because the delay meant my flight tomorrow would be rescheduled. This time we were flying directly over Bermuda, and Jim wasn't happy at all. "I have a bad feeling," he said. "Every time I drive by here, I feel the same. And in the dark, it looks even more eerie. It's because of the endless ocean. Outside, it's really dark." I joked, and that's when things started to get weird. There was a jolt, and the plane shook. He frowned. "It's just a strong wind." Jin looked scared. "I don't know, Captain. It didn't feel natural." Suddenly the 737 started to shake, uncontrollably, and my heart skipped a beat as the plane started to lose altitude at night. You can't see anything through the windshield and over the ocean. It's impossible to judge altitude naturally. I started checking the instruments for a fault. Maybe the engineers had missed something. "What the hell is going on?" Jim asked. I grabbed the controls and tried to lift the nose of the plane, reduce the power. Jim pulled the throttle, and I held the controls tightly. After 2 minutes of terror, the plane leveled off, and we both sighed in relief. Maybe we had hit an air pocket caused by the storm. "Jesus!" exclaimed Jim. Looking out the window, what I saw made my blood run cold at night. The white clouds that are usually seen are not very visible and depend on the light of the moon. What I saw defied all logic. The clouds below us formed a blood-red vortex, to my horror. The plane began to shake again, and the clouds began to spin. I think Jim peed when we were sucked into the vortex. The nose of the plane tilted towards what looked like a portal to hell. I tried desperately to brake, but it was as if something was controlling the plane. The controls did not respond, and we were plummeting. Jim and I exchanged a look of terror. We knew this was the end. We were going to crash. Could this be the cause of so many deaths in the Triangle? A meteorological anomaly that not even scientists could explain. But then something even stranger happened. The vortex spat us out, and we were flying in a completely different place. It was as if we had been transported to another dimension. The sky was darker. The clouds were black and red, and the air was permeated with an ominous silence. I did not understand what was happening scientifically. I did not believe in alternative dimensions, but a horrible feeling grew in my chest. And if it was real, what scared me even more was the earth below. It looked like the surface of Mars. What the hell just happened? Jim asked, visibly shocked. I don't know, but we have to get out of here fast, I answered. I tried to turn the plane, but the controls still did not work. We were trapped in that place with no way out. To top it off, the navigation system, it didn't show anything. I tried to make a satellite call, but it wouldn't connect. We were in trouble. It was then that something even stranger happened. I saw something move outside the window, something that shouldn't exist. It was like a shadow, with a shape getting closer and closer. A gray fog began to surround the plane, almost as if we were flying inside a cloud. But here, the clouds were black and red. Jim, do you see that? I asked, trembling. Jim looked out the window and his eyes widened in terror. What is that? The dark figure was a few inches from the plane. It seemed to be trying to get in. I felt a cold breeze inside the plane. Although we were still in flight, it was dark gray and had no defined shape, but it reminded me of the Grim Reaper from the stories. The cold sweat accumulated on my forehead when the entity formed a long finger with a sharp claw and hit the window. We both screamed in terror, and the figure suddenly disappeared. But then we heard a voice that seemed to come from inside. The plane was waiting for us, Jim and I. We looked paralyzed by fear. Who is there? I asked in a whisper without any courage. There was no answer, but we both felt a presence in the cabin, something that was not human. The cold that we already felt intensified, and I was left motionless, too scared to turn around. I saw how a gray fog began to fill the cabin, and that was the last thing I remember before I fainted. When I came to, we were again on the ground, flying over the place where we had found the portal, or whatever that vortex was. The rest of the flight was in silence, and I don't know how Jim and I managed to land the Avi safe and sound. Jim quit that same day, but I decided to stay. We both clearly remember what happened, but we didn't tell anyone. I like my job, and I didn't want to be sent to therapy, or worse yet, have my license taken away. I drove home in my Ford truck, clinging to the steering wheel in fear, not daring to look back. I stopped at a fast food place, and I ate in the van. When I got home, you couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I've lived alone most of my life, and I've never felt this before. I went straight to bed after a shower, but I couldn't sleep after an hour of tossing and turning. I finally fell asleep. But my dreams were filled with the shadowy entity mocking me because I didn't believe in the supernatural and telling me I would have to pay for it. I dreamed that I was trapped in that other dimension with no way out. I woke up with my pillow soaked with sweat. Despite having the air conditioning on, I tried to call Jim, but I realized I didn't have his number. I poured myself a bowl of cereal, and as I searched through my contacts for someone to call. I remembered. Jackson is an investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board. NTSB. I met him at the airport, and since I'm kind of a loner, we had met up a couple times to watch Marvel movies. So I knew he wouldn't think I was crazy. I called Jackson, who was normally laid back, turned serious and told me not to leave the house. He promised to arrive in 2 hours with his team. I felt relieved. I finished my coffee and noticed my laptop was in my room. I wanted to check if the airline had changed my flight, as I didn't want to fly today until Jackson fixed this problem. I walked into the room and the door slammed shut behind me. A cold feeling ran through my body as I looked around. No windows were open, so it couldn't be the wind. I moved forward cautiously, but stopped when a gray mist began to form in my room, the same mist we saw outside the plane. I froze as a figure began to form in the gray mist. I stood still as that thing threw chains made of dark gray mist that surrounded my ankles. The stabbing pain made me react, and I managed to get out of its clutches. I screamed and ran to the door, praying it wasn't locked, and luckily it was. I opened the door and closed it behind me, just as the thing crashed into it, letting out a terrifying howl. I ran to the garage. I found my keys and got in the truck. I sat in the driveway looking at my house. That thing had followed me from the plane, and yes, it had taken Jim too. My ankles hurt and were red and bruised, like they had been burned in hindsight. I should have grabbed an ice pack from the fridge. My ankles still hurt, so I used a water bottle I had in the truck to wet a cloth and wrapped it around my ankle. It eased the pain a little. I thought about leaving, but I couldn't get the truck to start. I was paralyzed after hours of waiting. I finally saw Jackson's car pull into the driveway, followed by an official-looking Cadillac. Jackson came out with his gear. He was carrying a duffel bag. I got out of the truck and shook his hand. "Thanks for coming, buddy," I said. Jackson pointed to. The two men getting off the cab were wearing black suits, ties, and sunglasses. One had a thick mustache, and the other showed no emotion. They stood waiting for Jackson to introduce us. "Chris, these are Daniel and John from the government." "Let me guess," I said with some sarcasm. "From the FBI. I can't confirm or deny that," Daniel replied. "Anyway, I'm Daniel, and he's John, of course, as if those were their real names. I guess Jackson told them everything," I said, pointing to my house where Jackson's team was taking pictures. Daniel nodded. "Yes, so they take care of this kind of thing?" I asked. The answer was the same as always. "I can't confirm or deny." "Well, if you want a coffee, you can come in," I said, looking at Jackson, who shook his head. "No, Chris, you can't come back in until we check everything," he replied. "Great," I said. "I need to know if they changed my flight." "Don't worry," John intervened, speaking for the first time. "We already talked to your airline." A shiver ran down my spine. What would these guys have said to the airline? Jackson saw my expression. "Don't worry. Shh. We told them you were working on a project for us." I breathed a sigh of relief. "And what happened to Jim, the co-pilot?" I asked. "Jim left." The state said, "Daniel, we also have him under surveillance." "How long will it take them to check everything?" I asked. "Unintentionally stay at the entrance and attract the attention of the neighborhood." Jackson frowned. "We need to take some energy readings here. I think you should find a hotel for tonight." I sighed. "I can at least pack my suitcase." The suited men shook their heads at the same time. No Cap and I left everything as it is. After a last handshake, I got in my truck and headed into town to find a hotel to stay. I had lunch at a restaurant and checked into a 3-star hotel that had just opened. The room was fine, but when I entered, I felt something strange. Don't get me wrong. One of the advantages of a pilot is that we usually stay in luxury hotels, but I had never experienced that feeling that made my skin crawl, as if I were not alone. I shrugged my shoulders and I opened the curtains. I knew there wasn't much I could do. I was technically trapped here until the agents gave me the okay. Jackson had given me a device he told me to use in case of emergency, whatever that meant. I looked at it. It looked like an old Nokia. Maybe I should press the green button and the phone would do its thing. Luckily, my phone was battery-free. So I closed the curtains, laid down on the comfy bed, and decided to watch something on Netflix to pass the time. I almost dropped my phone when opening the app. A picture of a woman appeared with a disturbing smile, with one after another of terror. I threw the phone on the pillow and decided to try to sleep. Just when my head touched the pillow, I felt its presence. A dark shadow enveloped me and laughed in my face as I struggled to escape that dimension. I did my best to see what it looked like, but I could only make out its eyes glowing like glowing coals. I tried to wake up, and just when I thought it, the entity smiled, or at least that I thought. I woke up, suddenly drenched in sweat, and tried to move my hand to wipe my forehead, but to my horror I couldn't move my hands. I tried to move my legs, but it was like they were made of lead. My heart was pounding. When I looked at my body and saw that I was covered by a gray fog, although it didn't look like fog, rather a thick liquid like lead something, drove me to look at the armchair, and I let out a moan of fear. There was that thing sitting, and this time I could see it clearly. Its cloak was made of the same gray fog that covered me, and its face was the most disconcerting thing. It had no defined shape, only those eyes of burning coal and a mouth with dark gray lips. The thing smiled, showing pointed and sharp teeth that were definitely not human. Chris muttered in a voice that sounded like nails scratching a chalkboard. I tried to cover my ears, but I realized that that thing had me under its control. My normally deep voice came out as a weak squeal. "What do you want?" I shuddered when the thing he smiled, showing more of those teeth that seemed to be stained with blood. "You don't remember me?" "I don't think so. I should have slept with that damn emergency phone near me." This thing was going to give me a heart attack at any moment. That's very bad, I'm not going to lie. I almost peed myself when the thing got up from the couch and came closer to me. But something was changing in its face. It was taking the form of Kate. "Open up," a voice shouted from outside the room. NTSB agents opened the thing and it disappeared, taking the gray smoke with it. The door opened. Thank God. Modern hotels have emergency controls, and Jackson came in with a worried face. "What happened?" he asked me. I sat down and looked at him. He came back. Jackson looked at me with guilt. "I'm sorry, Chris. That device that I gave you this designed to send us an alert when it detects strange energy, and we connected it to the anomaly we found in your house." "Speaking of that, what did they find?" "There is a fluctuation of energy in your house, mainly in your room, but I want to know more about the entity that visited you today." I told him everything that had happened, and he nodded. "Damn, I was wrong. I think something joined you on that flight." Friend, I stared at him. Could be the keys to my house or the truck. Yes, that is the thing. Jackson, I said, seriously. The thing looked a bit like Kate. Jackson paled. But before that, let me tell you about Kate. Kate was an incredible woman I met when I had just started working at the cargo airline. She was also a pilot and worked for a charter grandparents' company. I saw her at the airport restaurant and fell in love instantly. I approached her somewhat nervous. I asked her to go out, and to my surprise, she accepted. We started meeting for coffee, and we decided to go out together. I loved her very much. I was convinced that she was the perfect woman for me, and that I would be the perfect man for her. Well, that was until she disappeared. Needless to say how devastated I was. I had never had a satisfying relationship in high school or college, at least not one that lasted long, and watching Kate disappear from the face of the earth broke my heart. I went to the police. But apparently a boyfriend reporting an adult missing isn't enough. They said she was of age. Her boss had no idea she was missing and was worried. The police agreed to put out an alert. But nothing happened after we both laid a hand on Jackson. John had been listening to our conversation, typical of the government. 12 years ago, the NTSB was alerted to a missing plane over the Bermuda Triangle. I clung to my chair. The pilot of the plane was Kate. I looked at Jackson. They're covering it up. You've been covering up all the disappearances in the triangle, right? I turned bright red in anger. I stood up as if that was going to change anything. But Jackson brought me back to reality. Then help us, what? John cleared his throat. Help us, Captain. Join us to find Kate and solve the mystery once and for all. Of course, I accepted the agency. Anonymous spoke to my airline, who gave me paid leave, and they told me not to take anything with me. Not even my clothes, my truck key, the house key, and damn, even my glasses were left behind. Only I was going, yes, this included my phone and my laptop. The agency, whoever it was, paid for my hotel. Stay, they gave me new clothes, and even got me new glasses. They even bought me a new phone, and not a cheap one. I'm still at the hotel, and I'll be leaving soon. Jackson and his team don't want to risk flying, so it'll be 8 hours on the road. I'm going to fall asleep on the way. Anyway, it's almost 7 here. I haven't seen a sign of the thing since Jackson and the others left, which must be a good sign. No, but if only I knew how wrong I was. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the credit cards. Yes, Jackson wanted them too. His instructions were to cancel them and send new ones to a strange address. I had given all my worldly possessions to this agency. No name. My fingers brushed against a talisman, an object that made me cry. Kate had given it to me a long time ago, saying that her mother considered it good luck. And just so, you know, she never met her parents. She was planning to present it to her, as if it were burning. I grabbed my hand and dropped the damn object to the floor, where a gray fog began to filter into the real world. Full of panic, I quickly called. Jackson Daniel burst into my room. It seems that I was not going to have privacy, and as soon as he entered, the gray fog disappeared. Miraculously, Daniel nodded. I will stay in the room if you do not mind. We will take care of the talisman. Yes, as you wish, man. I need to wash my face a little. I entered the bathroom and a strong feeling of discomfort invaded me. I stopped. Suddenly it was a kind of gray smoke that was filtering through the vent. I slowly turned to the mirror and almost had a heart attack. The thing was right behind me, smiling a smile too wide. I quickly grabbed the hairdryer. Yeah, I know. But it was the only thing I found to defend myself. But there was no one there. What the hell? I looked in the mirror. And to my utter surprise, Koss reappeared behind me in the reflection. Daniel here. Daniel ran to the bathroom, but as expected, the thing smirked and disappeared. Daniel had an explanation. Untimely. Sorry, Captain. It seems the entity is attached to something of yours. It's the talisman. Daniel frowned. No, Captain, we can't go. But I think it's something in this room. Be it. You can't figure out what thing. No, Captain. Not until we test every single thing you took on that plane. Of course. I can't even tell you a moment alone without that thing bothering me. Jackson decided to move up the departure time we leave. In 10 minutes, Jackson and his friends at the NTSB took me to a facility at an undisclosed location, who knows where. No kidding. I spent most of the 7-hour trip sleeping. And guess what? That thing didn't bother me at all. I guess the theory that it was attached to something I took on that flight was true. After all, we eventually got to an NTSB office. The guards checked Jackson and the suit's IDs, and after looking at me anyway, my driver's license was in their custody. They let us through. Instead of going through the front door like normal people would, the team headed to an underground garage, parked the Cadillac. We got into an elevator, and Jackson surprised me by inserting a card into a reader. The elevator knew where and R when it started to descend. And no, the digital display. No, the floor numbers had the slightest. I suspected that we were going to a very secret facility that only a few people knew about, and I confirmed it. When the elevator doors opened, we were crowded into a dimly lit hallway and greeted by a big man. Welcome. Bravo, team, I see you have returned with our guest. Yes. Boss, said Daniel. The boss smiled at Jackson. I can't say I'm surprised. Congratulations on the promotion, Jackson. Thanks, boss. And excuse me, Captain, he said, looking at me. We can't shake anyone's hand, as it could cause problems with power fluctuations. You can call me boss. It's okay, boss, I replied, trying to integrate myself into the team. The boss seemed satisfied with us and nodded to Jackson, who was no doubt the leader of Bravo team. Jackson motioned for us to follow him, and we walked down a hallway with several doors. We opened one and found an apartment. I forgot to mention that it had no windows. I assumed we were underground. We, or rather the government guys, left their equipment on the floor and stood in front of me, all ready. He raised his hands. You may have many questions, and we will answer them. Well, I said, to start, who are you? Daniel was the one who answered. We are a division of the NTSB, known as EDO, the Organization of Extraordinary Divisions, and we answer directly to the Pentagon. We investigate anomalies reported by anyone involved in transportation. I turned to Jackson. Wait, buddy, I'm pretty sure last time I checked, you were just an inspector for the NTSB. Jackson shrugged. I was until I got promoted. That's why we didn't tell you anything until you signed the confidentiality agreement. Well, I just tore it up. John opened a bag and pulled out something that looked like a computer monitor. Really, Captain? We are very interested in the Bermuda Triangle, and this is the first time we have had someone with, let's say, side effects. What is the plan? I asked, sitting on the couch. The government guys shrugged. We are in quarantine. We have to stay in this decontamination chamber for a few hours until the boss gives us more information. So I was stuck with these guys for a couple of hours more. Jackson assured me that his team was dealing with the belongings I left behind, and that I would just have to ask whatever I needed was early. So I decided to take a nap. The apartment had 2 rooms, and I decided to share it with Jackson. I slept soundly without anything disturbing my rest at dawn. They called us to breakfast, and the boss informed us that we had to be in the meeting room at 99:30 sharp. Sounded good. To me at 99:30, we were in the common conference room with an electronic whiteboard and some chairs. There were the four of us together with the boss, whose name nobody knew, and a couple of people in military uniforms. The boss was the first to speak. His deep voice resonated in the small room. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, our main objective is the Bermuda Triangle. The electronic whiteboard showed a map highlighting the area. A pilot, Captain Chris, and his first officer, Jim, from the airline, experienced something that interests us very much. Captain, could you tell us what happened? I stood up and told the story, secretly hoping that no one would laugh at me, or that I wouldn't end up in a mental hospital. However, everyone's faces were either horrified or surprised. Jackson cleared his throat for the record. Jim hasn't seen the entity since the first encounter. We have come to the conclusion that the entity has linked itself to some belonging of the captain of that flight. I raised my hand. Captain said, "Does anyone seriously believe this?" The chief smiled and motioned to a guy in a lab coat, a scientist, to speak to us. The scientist stood up and took the floor. "Well, friends, to answer your question, Captain, we firmly believe in the laws of energy. We have observed a slight anomaly in the Bermuda Triangle. In terms of energy, when Jackson reported your incident, we were ordered to investigate. We found that the energy signature in your house is different than the surroundings, which suggests that something unusual is going on, so it is not something paranormal." I asked cautiously. The scientist smiled. "I am afraid not, Captain. Everything has to do with energy. So what about the flight? The place we went to?" I asked. "Don't blame me. I was looking for answers." The scientist seemed less sure. "That is still under investigation. To be honest." The boss gestured for the scientist to sit down and took the floor again. "What interests us is that entity you spoke of. Captain, we have been observing the triangle for years, but we have never seen energy spikes like the current ones. We are analyzing your belongings to look for traces of residual energy, but we are still in process for the benefit of Bravo. Team said, one of the military. We have access to a satellite that is recording everything that happens in that area. We will continue to monitor the energy fluctuations, and we will inform you when we are finished. That is all, gentlemen." The report left me confused, turning it over in my head as I tried to sleep. Could such an energy exist that created another world? I didn't believe it at all. After 2 weeks, the science team had a breakthrough. The higher-ups were putting pressure on the boss. They needed the satellite back. I don't know how to explain it. He said, calling us to the office, but it seems the talisman gives off a different energy signature. Kate believed a lot in that talisman. I replied, annoyed. She must have had it the day she crossed the triangle when she disappeared. Maybe she would have survived. I checked the NTSB records on the incident, and nothing in that 3-page folder gave me any useful information, except the time and day of the flight. I reported to the boss. He looked at the four of us. "I want you, Bravo team, to accept the challenge of investigating what happens in the triangle. Our analysts have detected that during the full moon exactly at 21:39, there is a spike in energy, but only for a fraction of a second, at a specific point in the triangle." Let me guess. Boss said, "Daniel, it matches the trajectory Chris flight." Yes, I already told them not to call me Captain. It gets annoying after a while. The boss pointed at Daniel with his pen. "That's how it's done." Sir John began somewhat nervously. "No, you're suggesting we fly to the triangle, right?" The boss smiled. That's exactly what I suggest from that moment on. Everything began to speed up. The full moon would arrive in a week. Ready curiously, the talisman didn't burn me when I held it. This time, which led Jackson to suggest that maybe something in my briefcase was activating it. The science team had several theories about the triggers, suspecting that some of the objects in my briefcase were responsible. Anyway, we exercised and prepared, as the military team would say, for the big day that was approaching. The team would be made up of the 4 of us, 3 soldiers and 2 pilots. The chief and the science team would direct the operations from the base. Oh, and before you ask, no, I still didn't know where we were. I slept most of the way here. I suspect that the hombres G drugged my coffee, but at least the food is good and free. On the day of departure, we loaded our backpacks, we double-checked our communications equipment, and did a lot of last-minute checks. I was amazed when the boss took us to the hangar. We were going to fly in one of the new planes in development. Something that defied all logic, looked like an alien ship with a slim and elegant design, like a mix between a plane and a helicopter with a stealthy style. Impressive. The boss was nervous. The Pentagon is not very happy that we lend this toy. Try not to scratch it. Okay, the interior of the plane was as impressive as the exterior. Some luxurious leather seats awaited us that looked like they were taken from a private jet. And as expected, I could not resist taking a look at the cockpit. Let's get something straight. There are 2 types of pilots, and as many as me, those who hate modern computerized cockpits and prefer the old ones with indicators, and those who like. I love technology and digital displays. I didn't understand why anyone would want to use the old gauges that took forever to read anyway. The cockpit design impressed me. Large digital screens surrounded the pilots, who had joysticks to control the plane. I gave them the thumbs up and went back to the crew. After a final check of the crew, we got the green light to take off. The takeoff was extremely smooth, and once in the air the pilots smiled at us. I don't know if they told you, but this baby can fly at almost 3 times the speed of sound. So fasten your seat belts. We are flying at 40,000 feet to avoid air traffic. Wow, said Daniel, clapping. Then we will get there. In the blink of an eye, I didn't look at the team. I knew them well after 2 weeks. Daniel was an outgoing guy. Jackson was good. Jackson and John only spoke when necessary, which was not very often. Anyway, once we reached our cruising altitude, Jackson sent the soldiers to the cockpit. He wanted to tell us something only to us. He indicated that, and the tension mixed in the environment. We were all aware that this trip was dangerous and that there was a possibility of not returning, but we were determined to discover the truth. I wanted to know why Kate had disappeared. I think Jackson noticed my concern when he told me, "Everything will be okay, friend." As we entered the airspace of the Bermuda Triangle, something in the environment changed. The clouds began to darken and take on a reddish tone, forming a disturbing curtain that seemed to devour the light of the sun. My heart began to beat strongly, as if a cold hand was squeezing it from within. Suddenly the navigation instruments began to fail. Flashing lights and alarms filled the cab as the pilots, visibly nervous, failed to maintain control of the plane. My sweaty hands gripped the seat tightly, and I saw the same concern on Jackson's face. It seemed as if something invisible was controlling every movement. I tried to look out one of the windows, but only saw those storm clouds surrounding us, as if we were going through a tunnel with a life of its own. that led us to the horror of our disappearance and possible death. Then the impact, a loud metal crash echoed in my ears as the world around me plunged into chaos. The plane hit the water with devastating force, breaking into pieces as I watched the crew members emerge from the rubble. Pain and confusion took over me as everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I found myself alone among the shattered remains of what was once our plane. The silence was overwhelming, only interrupted by the soft whisper of the wind through the debris. I woke up on what seemed to be a small island, surely swept away by the waves. I got up with difficulty, every fiber of my body screaming in pain. I looked around, desperately searching for my companions, but there was no trace of them. I was alone in the middle of the darkness, surrounded by the mysterious and oppressive atmosphere of the place. I got up with effort among the twisted remains of the plane. My body ached and my mind stunned by the impact. The light of the dying sun painted the sky with reddish tones, while the lightning of a storm formed a seemingly endless wall. With determination, I ignored the pain and began to look for survivors on the island. Each step was a fight against exhaustion, and fear that threatened to paralyze the jungle seemed to devour the light enveloping me in a disturbing darkness. As I advanced between the twisted trees, then a sound broke the oppressive silence. A distant murmur that seemed to whisper in an unknown language. My heart began to beat hard in my chest. As I forced myself to follow the sound, the darkness closed around me, the shadows dancing in a sinister way among the undergrowth. Nearby, the murmur suddenly stopped, leaving the jungle in an absolute silence. It was then that the whispering voice resonated in my mind, a cold and hollow echo that seemed to come from the depths of the island. Chris called me, wrapping me in a spiral of terror. I knew you would return. You are tied to this place, the voice whispered with a malicious tone. I stepped back with my eyes wide open, fighting against the feeling of claustrophobia that threatened to drown me. What dark force inhabited that cursed place? What secrets did it hide in its shadows? The air was filled with a thick and mysterious fog that seemed to see me like a shroud, my lungs filled with its cold and humid vapor, making me feel as if I were breathing the same darkness without being able to see. Beyond, a few meters away, I started to run blindly, desperate to escape the unknown that lurked in the fog. It was then that I saw it in the distance between the dense fog. The figure of an old plane appeared. Despite its worn and rusty appearance, it seemed to be intact, as if it had been preserved in time by some unknown force. Without thinking twice, I ran towards it, hoping to find a way of escape. My hands trembled as I tried to open the door of the plane with a metallic creak. It gave way to my efforts, revealing dark and dusty. There was no time to lose. I hurried to enter the cabin, and I clung to the steering wheel in desperation, praying that the old plane would work again. The engine growled in protest, as if awakening from a long sleep after years of inactivity. With a dull noise, the plane came to life, vibrating with energy under my hands. I knew it was my only chance to escape from that cursed place. Just as I was preparing to take off, I saw the dark figure emerge from the fog. Its sharp teeth gleamed as it sketched a macabre smile, and its burning eyes watched me with hunger. The creature was insatiable, and now it was closer than ever with my heart in my throat. I pressed the accelerator, and the plane launched forward, cutting through the fog with force. I felt a momentary relief as the ground moved away from beneath me, but I knew I was not yet safe. The creature was still there, hidden in the shadows of that thick fog. The plane trembled and shook as it struggled to get through the storm of lightning and reddish clouds that surrounded the island. Each lightning bolt illuminated the sky in a ghostly way, revealing the fury of nature around us. My sweaty hands clung to the steering wheel as I silently prayed that the plane would withstand the onslaught of the storm. The wind howled with an unrelenting ferocity, as if trying to tear me from the heavens and return me to the abyss of the triangle. The rain hit the fuselage with such force that it threatened to tear the fragile structure of the plane. But then, like a miracle, the storm began to dissipate. Slowly, the reddish clouds faded in the horizon, revealing a clear and starry sky that seemed to extend to infinity. A sigh of relief escaped my lips as I contemplated the celestial spectacle before my eyes. After a while of calm flight, I saw in the distance the flickering lights of a city. It was an oasis of civilization, in the middle of the darkness and uncertainty of the ocean, with a heart full of hope. I began the descent, guiding the plane towards the landing strip. With firm and expert hands, the tiredness and tension of the last moments finally took hold of me when the plane touched the ground. Firmly, my muscles relaxed, releasing the tension accumulated during that aerial odyssey. But before I could taste the relief, completely darkness enveloped me, and everything turned black rhythmic sound of a machine, marking my heartbeat, pulled me from the depths of sleep. Dazed and confused, I blinked slowly, trying to place myself in my surroundings. Where was I? What had happened? I woke up in what seemed to be a hospital. Then in the dim light, I saw a familiar figure next to me. My eyes opened wide as I recognized the worried face that watched me tenderly. It was her. I thought I had lost you.